Hello and welcome to This Week in Review with Nigel Farage. Nigel, let's start with property, which is one of the biggest asset classes in the UK, probably the most important for many of the people watching. There's been quite a bit of news. We should start with this new plan to build 100,000 houses, new houses, that were supposedly blocked by EU environmental regulations. Do you buy the argument and do you buy the plan?
To a certain extent, yes, I do. We are hidebound still in lots of areas of our life by existing EU directives and agreements. And these, of course, are things that the civil service love, think are wonderful, and in a very British way, always gold plate and make just so much worse than they actually needed to be. But you do need to get to the root of the problem. We've said it many, many times before on this podcast. We haven't got rid of so much EU law. But a mate of mine down in Hampshire is trying to do a little housing development, half a dozen houses, old barn conversion type job. He's in the Test Valley catchment area. He's stuck with a whole load of stuff on nitrates that is effectively going to put the price of each of the 6 apartments up by 25,000 quid. Now, we all want to save the planet, but we have to find a balance that works. And somehow between EU directives and between our own ministries, let alone the zealotry of the sort of Carrie Johnson, Zach Goldsmith era, which we still have, it is holding back house building in a very, very considerable way. So I've struggled recently to agree with much that Michael Gove has said, particularly on the rental sector, even though I would call him a friend. But I think on this he's right. And I think on this the government are right. And of course the RSPB and all the publicly funded bodies all scream blue murder. But in reality, this is the government saying, yeah, you know what, we need to do something. And the pressure they're getting from the big builders on this is huge. Some of these are FTSE companies. These are serious organizations. So, yeah, it's the right debate to be having. It really is.
So is it good news for those big building companies then? Do you think this is a sign of a bigger change to come in a new direction?
This is the fag end of this government. Let's not pretend. Come on, they're knackered. We're sort of, the finishing line for the marathon's in sight, and maybe they'll just about stagger across it. And even looking at Rishi's new cabinet appointments, it's all a chumocracy. It's all his mates. There's not a radical really among them. Gove, to be fair, is a radical thinker. He is actually a radical thinker. But he's one of the very, very few. They're basically careerists. They are falling behind. We've got it's not relevant directly, but it is relevant. The number of people dying on NHS waiting lists, Labour now more trusted on immigration, tax, and the NHS. Listen, if they were genuinely radical, they could turn this around with a year to go, a year and a bit to go. I just don't think they got it within them.
It sounds like such a big incentive. That's disappointing. It's also worth mentioning that transactions are back to 2012 levels in the property market. The house price acceleration downwards is at its fastest pace for recent figures. Are you getting worried about the housing crash? You said before that you're not. Are you?
Look, we had all those years of free money. There's free money. Is it any surprise that people took out big mortgages and we saw the extraordinary rise in property prices? There are a lot of people with a lot of borrowed free money now scratching their heads and worrying. And so you start to get bankruptcies and forced sales, and you see a decline in the market. And of course, there are some people now being forced into negative equity, where we were back in the early, my generation was back in the early 90s. But look, with the British population increasing by 1 million a year, that is a hell of a buffer at the bottom of the market. We've just discussed house prices. There is a demand-supply equation here that says, your £4.5 million house in Chelsea could collapse to 3.5 million, but so blooming what? Is your £120,000 terraced house on the outskirts of Birmingham, is the price of that going to collapse? No. It might fall 10%, it might fall 15%, it might fall 20%, but so what? No, I really don't think. I just can't see, with that demand-supply equation, the middle and lower ends of the housing market falling out of bed. I just can't.
Yeah, the amount of transactions that actually happen at these very high or very low levels is also a bit misleading because the price is driven entirely by the marginal buyer and seller.
Sorry to interrupt, but if you're enjoying this content, you can get it every single day. Just click the link in the description or go to fortuneandfreedom.com. Get a daily email from our team of experts. Thank you.
Let's move on to ULEZ. There's been a reversal that not just on the ULEZ idea, and not just on taxing all non-electric cars coming to London. I feel like this is a symptom of a bigger shift on net zero more broadly that's continuing that we've talked about before. But it's getting really obvious now.
I am speaking to you physically from literally the furthest point from central London that is in the ULEZ zone. My postcode is Tunbridge. My phone number is Westerham. We were part of Kent County Council and 7X District Council until 1965. And then somehow they put us into London, the GLA. In the 3 villages here I live in, there are more horses than people. People here support the local hunt. They go shooting. I mean, it's rural. And I have never, and it's not just here, I have never seen such public anger over an issue as I have on ULEZ. I did a GB News show from my local pub the other night. I mean, really, people are, and look, doesn't bother me. Of course not. I've got a big salary. I've got a new car. Doesn't bother me. But the woman down the road running the riding stables, her horse box isn't compliant. Even some of the farmers' tractors, they're not compliant. My ex-landlord said it's going to cost me £12.50 to go to the doctor's, £12.50 to get a prescription, and £12.50 to go for a pint. I can't think of a more iniquitous tax. And there's a logical argument to this. Every car over 3 years old has to have an annual MOT. And emissions checks are part of that MOT to be allowed to drive on the road. So it's dead simple. You want to reduce inflation, you want to reduce emissions, then simply what you do is you set a level for an MOT standard, and any car that passes it is fine, and any car or van that doesn't pass it is not fine. And it's irrelevant whether it's 6 years old or 30 years old. But no, this is a massive tax grab, and it's also about control. You've never seen more cameras. But what is really interesting, Nick, is the reaction to it. Now, look, some say in a month it'll all be over. The blade runners, as they're called, the people that are going around vandalising the cameras, they are literally organised into little tight military-style units. They bloody mean it. This isn't going to stop. I have not seen a civil disobedience, and I'm not encouraging it. I might understand it, but I'm not encouraging it. I've not seen anything like this since the poll tax riots of 1990. And I'm beginning to think this may mark a turning point. A turning point where people say to Khan and others, we've just had enough. It also brings into question devolution. It's all well and good saying to London, you've got a mayor, but if the people living half a mile from here in Kent, if it affects them as well, you've got to ask yourself some real questions about devolved powers and how they're operating. And this leads into a much bigger debate around net zero. Some of the arguments I've been making in public for 15 years are now becoming mainstream arguments, such as why should we wear a hair shirt if China is belching out all this stuff and building 80 new coal-fired power stations everywhere? I'm hearing my own words coming back to me now from some quite senior, not just political figures, but actually press figures as well. Editorials. I mean, the Sun newspaper thought we should all go green 3 years ago. They don't now. So there is a change of thinking and a realization that wind energy, we're being sold a pup. Cheapest form of energy. Cheapest form of energy. What are you moaning about? I tell you what, add up the costs of backing it up with gas. Add up the costs of the new pylons you need to build. Add up all the costs that go around wind energy. And even if the subsidy levels have fallen, the real cost of wind energy just isn't sustainable. And we're beginning to see investors in the North Sea say, hang on, this just doesn't work anymore. So even on wind energy in the last few weeks, and I've always hated the blooming things, but even with wind energy in the last few weeks, we're beginning to see, how can I put it, rational debate coming into view. So I think right across Europe, there is and the UK, there is a genuine rethink about the extent to which we're prepared to damage ourselves.
And that's already having a financial impact. The little wind turbine producers having massive write-downs on their wind projects, both future and current. And as I said, that's really impacting their share prices quite frequently. So it's already, already showing up where it really counts in financial markets. The strangest story that I spotted this week is, I'm just going to have to read this out so I don't get it wrong. Europe is spending record amounts on Russian liquefied natural gas. Even as the bloc tightens sanctions against the Kremlin, new analysis shows. It's £4.5 billion worth so far this year, half of all of Russia's LNG stocks the Europeans are buying. Now, I don't know where to start. I'm curious where you're going to start on this, because there's so many angles, so much hypocrisy, so many ridiculous, just aggravating angles. It's just driving me nuts.
Jolly well done, the Germans. Marvellous. Angela Merkel, fantastic. Remember, we were told women leaders are so much better than men. Look at Angela Merkel. Yeah, brilliant. Tying herself as close as possible to Russia. Oh, and indeed to China as well. So this is very much German-led, and it's why, really, EU support, despite the fact it's on their border, but EU support, even for the war in Ukraine, has been, frankly, as lukewarm as it's been. And if you take the military side of the equation out, it's just, Putin must just be laughing to himself. But this is hypocrisy on a level you simply cannot believe. And as winter approaches, of course, it leaves them incredibly vulnerable. Now, the counter-argument will be that much of the LNG they bought has gone into stock, and that countries like France and Germany now do have unlike us, do have full stocks. But there is still, if we get a long, cold winter, an extraordinary vulnerability if Putin decides to make life difficult.
And it could lead to more inflation, sort of a re-emergence of inflation, energy price-led inflation, which is what triggered things last time around as well.
You can't rule it in, but you certainly can't rule it out.
Let's finish, Nigel, on your Rugby World Cup predictions. It starts, I think it's next week. I'm not very hopeful for Australia. I'm not very hopeful for England either. I'm running out of countries to support here. What are your predictions?
English rugby is in the most depressing state it's been for many, many years. We've been in decline since 2019. Well done to the women's football team for getting through to the final of the Women's World Cup. Well done to the English cricket team, who would have beaten Australia had it not been for the English ghastly summer. For the Rugby World Cup, my excitement level is about 3 out of 10. And for somebody who is a sports fanatic to say that, says, I don't think things bode very well at all, sadly. But let's hope it's a great tournament. But don't expect much from us.
And don't expect us to mention it again then either. Nigel, thanks very much for joining us in there for at home. Thanks for watching.
Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you agree it's never been more important to take control of your own money, your own financial situation. We do a daily free email, a Fortune and Freedom daily email with lots of knowledge, lots of insight. It's a very useful way of protecting yourself for the future. So please click the link in the description or go to fortuneandfreedom.com and get my daily email.